la vaccination parce que les doses n'arrivent pas.
And also because of the,
Et c'est une urgence économique et sociale compte tenu de la très grande difficulté à décider de mesures contraignantes pour faire face au virus, là où l'économie informelle est si importante, où les échanges sont si structurants pour la vie économique, la création d'opportunités, parfois simplement la possibilité de s'alimenter, et compte tenu des conséquences économiques de la crise. Nous l'avons largement dit, l'épidémie de Covid-19 va avoir, a d'ores et déjà et aura de manière sûre un impact massif sur l'économie du continent africain cette année après l'année prochaine et sans doute pour les années à venir, bien supérieur à toutes les crises précédemment connues. Si on prend la crise financière que nous avons connue il y a 10 ans. Les estimations, et je pense qu'elles sont plutôt des minorants de la réalité,
Now, the different estimates, and I think they're quite conservative, talk about $300 billion in needs of financing between today and 2025. That is for Africa, and it's probably too conservative. It's probably more that is needed. Now, at the same time, Africa is capable of living up to many challenges, and I think this is something that came out of all of our discussions. This moment now can be a good opportunity to grasp, to respond to many challenges we did not want to face up to previously. We just brushed out the problem under the carpet and carried on working along the rules that existed and had existed for decades and were not adapted anymore. So the objective of this summit was twofold: to give short-term responses to the problem and launch a dynamic and a momentum to create this strategic and economic New Deal with the African continent. And I think that on these 2 points, we've managed to make headway. Of course, you can't solve all problems in a day, or even whether it be finding solutions to the African continent or the relations it has with the West. But the discussions we had last night and the long discussions we had this afternoon have partaken of a change in mindset and have allowed us to launch something for the short term. So what? In the short term, we have consolidated what we obtained together: the moratorium on the debt, on the principle of the debt held by the G20 countries for 2020 and 2021. Then, secondly, the consolidation of a common framework for debt restructuring. 3 countries, Chad, Ethiopia, and Zambia, we're willing to go ahead and to finalize the work between now and the last semester. This is going to prove the credibility of this common plan to restructure debt with all of the creditors around the table. And as for the moratorium, the debt moratorium on the principle on the interest rates, you have the U.S., Europe, the U.S., and China that have decided to work together. In the restructuring of the debt, the advances made during these 2 days is a great achievement. Of these 2 days, we managed to solve all the problems of arrears, which were the utmost condition to relaunch the momentum for Sudan, and this under the umbrella of the IMF will manage to reschedule the debt and restructure the debt that France has committed to do so. Third achievement, the issuance of special drawing rights, 650 billion worth of special drawing rights. This issue of SDRs is going to trigger something that is going to allow the international community, the IMF, to provide what Africa is lacking today in comparison with the US, Europe, or China. And what it is lacking is a combination of monetary and budgetary tools to live up to their crisis. So these 650 billion of SDRs, and I would like to congratulate the director of the IMF for, This represents 33 billion for Africa altogether and 24 for sub-Saharan Africa. Now, we were unanimous around the table to say this is too little, that it's just not possible. So today we have decided, over and above this short-term achievement, to start working in the next few weeks. And I'm talking about working on the technicalities in a political agreement that we hope to obtain between now and the G7 in October or the G20 in October, that is going to mobilize the IMF. On doing what? First, reallocating special drawing rights of the richer countries to Africa. France is willing. France is ready to do so. Portugal as well, and other countries represented here as well. We are willing to reallocate special drawing rights, because France will be deposited with, to Africa. This will be $100 billion for Africa. So we need to triplicate the existing envelope for Africa. So our work in the next few weeks is going to be to convince other countries to do the same as France, starting by the US, and that is work we're going to have to do with Congress and with the executive in the US. But I'm pretty confident that we'll get there. So this is our commitment today: is to go and reach the $100 billion worth of special drawing rights for Africa, which means a great amount of reallocation of drawing rights of richer countries. Secondly, we need to work on the allocation of SDRs to the African Development Bank and the Public Bank in Africa, because it's a way of leveraging these funds to be able to fund things in the field by innovation. This is technical. This is going to require technical work, and the IMF is going to be required to do so. And thirdly, we need to start working, and this is something that several of us are going to speak out on. We need to work on the gold reserves of the IMF and using part of those gold reserves, which have reappraised during the crisis, because gold remains standard and it can be used. So we can use part of those reserves, the gold reserves, to convince some countries that might be reluctant to reallocate their SDRs, and to use the gold to transfer even more greater amounts to the African continent. So this is the agreement we managed to reach today, and this is what we've decided to do in terms of work in the next few months to do more for Africa in terms of budget and economic recovery. Of course, all this will be completed by we help by IDA and an effort of the World Bank, and they will be there to help the African economies in the short term. In addition to this package of elements that I've just detailed, but there's the matter of vaccines. It has kept us busy, and we've discussed this at length. The existing situation is unfair and ineffective, because if we carry on as things are today, we are condemning Africa not to be protected and variants to develop on the African continent, and this is condemning us and forcing us to run after the virus. So, in the framework of ACTA, we've mobilized a vehicle called COVAX. This vehicle has allowed us to transfer doses of vaccines, and 50 million vaccines have been transferred through the COVAX platform to Africa. France has been mobilized, and funding has been mobilized, I think, 22 billion. However, all of this is still not sufficient. Let me remind you of the objective of COVAX, which was to vaccinate 20% of the African people. The European Union has decided to add with AVA to reach the level of 30% of the African population vaccinated. What we've managed to do today is come up with two initiatives, and the first one is a very strong one, and it is to produce vaccines massively in Africa for Africans, and to develop through partnerships, financial industrial partnerships, to develop the capacity of Africa to develop vaccines, recombined proteins, messenger RNA in the next semesters now. These platforms sometimes take time to be set up, but our desire is to help Africa, and our will is to help Africa to get equipped, to equip themselves through strategic partnerships and through financing, in particular by the World Bank, and by the two things we've decided today that we support. One, technology transfers, and second, something that was requested from the WHO, WTO, and the patents, so there be a transfer of any type of vaccine knowledge to Africa. So during the epidemic, we have to lift all of the constraints, whether it's intellectual property rights or any financing or other difficulties. All of these hurdles will be removed, and this is the first pillar we decided on today. The second pillar we're going to mobilize our efforts for is to push the ambition of COVAX further. And this is the very short term, is 2021. We're talking about purchasing doses to vaccinate people and push COVAX as an objective of 20% up to 40%, and give a mandate to the International Monetary Fund to see how we can mobilize more funds. It's a total envelope of 50 billion that are required to do this, and on the basis of what has already been decided in the framework of COVAX and the existing bilateral commitments, to use part of the SDRs and to earmark them or to orient them towards that vehicle, and to see how between now and July we can use doses that might be exceeding doses to send them to Africa, and have the objective of 40% of the African population vaccinated by 2021. This is something that can be done if we mobilize the funding and we organize ourselves correctly. That is what we decided to do as a vaccination goes. Now, on a broader scale, on the basis of these first elements that you see are quite strong, what we want to do is to build this economic New Deal in a very strong way, and to have a strong New Deal with the African continent to set the basis for a new growth model. This goes to, first of all, a macroeconomic shock that is a lot stronger, and mobilization of all of the instruments to be able to meet the sanitary and economic emergency, but to set wider bases for the next semesters, months and semesters and years, to set the bases, stronger bases for a stronger relationship by modernizing the budgetary framework and the African mechanism for financial stability. There was a clear consensus around the table to say that we need to rethink our mechanisms, rethink and redesign our instruments, and give greater let the Africans speak for themselves, and find mechanisms that are more adapted to macroeconomic realities, and to do on the African continent what we all do ourselves at home. And we need to acknowledge that after the COVID crisis, China, the US and Europe are readapting their macroeconomic and financial framework. So yes, we need to provide an economic and a financial answer to Africa that takes into account the spending required for security in many African countries, and we to integrate this in our discussions about budget with the IMF, the huge burdens, the military burden that exists in many African countries because the epicenter of terrorism has moved to Africa. Secondly, we need to take into account the demographic realities and the economic and financial difficulties that have resulted of the impact of COVID. And there's an essential role to be played by the African Union, the budgetary framework and the different mechanisms, and and governments carried by the Africans themselves in connection with the large international organizations and donors, but where donor will have a greater say and will be able to define its own rules. And it's on the basis of that we wish to develop a mechanism for financial innovation that will allow to convert debt into projects, whether for climate, for education, for food, but innovative is the key word. That's for public funding. Now, for private financing, we launched something today, and I would like to thank Mokhtar Diop, the International Financial Community. The Alliance for Africa will invest $1 billion for SMEs and medium-sized enterprises to allow this kind of development in direct, this is directly correlated to what we launched in Biarritz, the INFAWA, with the African Development Bank for women's entrepreneurship. These mechanisms allow to extend loans and serve as a basis as seed capital for entrepreneurship, and they will be the first new mechanisms, because the key of the model for growth in Africa is a macroeconomic shock with new governance, but also mobilization of private investors and private investment, and a massive development of entrepreneurship everywhere in Africa. So this Alliance for African Entrepreneurship, which we are launching today, what we want to do is hold a meeting during the second semester of 2021, mobilizing the greatest number of countries which want to support us and develop the financing that goes into that. What we're launching today is, as you can very well see, a series of innovations for governance and financial instruments to meet the emergency. The New Deal we're launching today for Africa and through Africa will, I think, be the first of a series of meetings, first of all with the African Union, Mr. President, in order to define those rules and take ownership of the work. Then there will be the G7 meetings and the G20 that will deal with the SDRs, and there will be a meeting during the second semester on the treatment of debt, and then a later meeting on investing by the private sector. And all these initiatives will converge in a meeting under French presidency of the European Union. We'll remobilize ourselves under a similar format to give greater importance to such a summit. So I'm going to stop here, and I'm going to thank all of you for your participation, your support, your commitment, and I'm now going to give the floor to President Tshisekedi.
Merci, Monsieur le Président et cher Emmanuel. Je crois que
Thank you, dear Emmanuel, dear President. I think that you have covered everything that we discussed. I would first and foremost like to congratulate you for this initiative, because I believe that this is quite a novel initiative. This is not a forum which will have no follow-up at all. As you just heard, the President, we have fixed a certain number of objectives, and we are going to start working on these objectives. Our objectives are first and foremost vaccinating the largest number of people in Africa. Well, as an African and as the President of the RDC, I do admit that there isn't enough mobilization on the part of our own populations due to a few concerns that the vaccine is coming from elsewhere. And this is exactly why we must try to manufacture the vaccines in Africa itself. I think that will really have a significant impact on the attitude of populations. And of course, the economic consequences will also follow. We have also mentioned access to intellectual property. This is also one of our objectives. We need to have the international property right so as to be able to manufacture these vaccines on the African continent itself. From the economic standpoint, it was discussed that we have to aim at economic recovery in Africa, first and foremost extending the moratorium, which was going to end in June 2021. Now this has been extended till the end of the year. And of course, what would be preferable would be to go even up to end of 2022, the ISSD. We also spoke about the cancellation of the debt restructuring element. Now, this will depend on the attitude of the donors. And as President Macron mentioned, thanks to this summit, we have managed to bring together the United States, the European Union, and China, who all agree on this. So we will all work out the modalities together. Then SDR issue 33 billion should be ramped up to 100 billion. That has been mentioned. Then access of Africans to financial markets. This is also something that we would like to see happen. So that just like all the other countries, we should be able to have this instrument as well to be able to get loans. And we as Africans, we should also make the necessary effort. Now, if there is special treatment given to Africa, the thing is, well, sometimes if Africans don't send out the right signal to donors, we need to therefore improve governance. In our own countries, we need to really focus on reforms. We must fight against corruption, fight against money laundering. We must make sure that our economic systems, our financial systems are fully transparent and reassuring, therefore, reassuring for investors. And we must take on board the potential of our youth. And once again, I'd like to thank President Macron and the IFC's initiative, the Alliance, and I hope that it will be organized in Kinshasa for the first time under my presidency of the African Union, because this will indeed help us to promote small and medium-sized enterprises and young entrepreneurs in particular. We also must focus on women's empowerment and the promotion of women to make sure that women play a key role in our societies, in our systems, be they political or economic. And to conclude, I would just like to point out that the focus of our discussions, and this came up again and again, was pertaining to insecurity, the fact that the epicenter of terrorism has moved to Africa today. So we have to be very, very careful about this, otherwise all our hopes will be dashed. And all the initiatives that we are trying to implement in order to boost the African economy post-COVID will be to no avail. So this is also something that I was very pleased to note, which is the fact that there is indeed call for an increase in security measures for countries that are facing insecurity. So this, in a nutshell, was what we discussed during this summit. And let me add, as I said at the outset, that this time I really think that there are concrete outcomes. We have a lot of work to do, so we must really keep up the momentum. We have different objectives. We have set targets. Now we need to reach them because that's the only way for Africa to bounce back. Africa is a continent has indeed a good future, and I have always placed the future of Africa, I would say, in its youth. Our youth is our main asset. It is our strength. But then it will all depend on how we, as leaders, we take these young people on board. It is up to us to educate them, to train them, and therefore and offer them a better future, and in turn a better future for our continent. So once again, dear Emmanuel, congratulations, and thank you very much on behalf of all of Africa for this excellent initiative. Thank you. Thank you very much, President. I'd like to give the floor now to Macky Sall. Thank you very much, Mr. President. Dear Emmanuel, after what President Félix just said, on behalf of the continent, African continent, I would like to express the gratitude of all Africans to President Macron for this initiative. And it's not the first one. Ever since the pandemic began, we've had several virtual meetings to work on access to vaccines, to work on debt. And today, the summit in Paris that has brought together almost all of the African continent, but not just the African continent. We've had members of the G7, the G20. Everyone was around the table to talk about the financing of African economies. So I would like to thank you once again for this initiative. We were very involved in this summit, and I must say that your whole team, your technical team, has worked very hard and very efficiently to organize this summit. And this summit has been a major milestone before the G7 and before the G20, followed by the French presidency of the European Union. Now, and I have to congratulate the IMF, and in particular Madam Kristalina Georgieva, for the efficiency and the commitment of the IMF, and alongside the World Bank Group, I would say the IFC, and in particular also our own continental bank, which is the African Development Bank. Mr. President, you have summed up very eloquently everything that was discussed. It was perfectly clear. What I just want to underscore is that right now we're looking at a paradigm shift. This is something new. We have always imposed projects and programs on Africa, whereas now we are in a phase of co-construction. We are looking at what is good for us and working together towards that objective. And that is what holds hope. Because after all, we understand our problems, we understand our difficulties, and one has to note that there is indeed a change in the mindset of developed countries, of G7, G20 countries. It is now obvious that we have a joint responsibility here. For vaccination, for instance, of course, we have to focus on health security above all. If we continue the trend whereby only 2 or 3% of Africans are vaccinated, well, new variants, which will be highly resistant, will be developed on the African continent, and which will completely wipe off all the efficacy of the vaccines that already exist. So our planet will not be safe unless we work together. And this awareness was born thanks to the enthusiasm of President Macron and also through the interventions that I heard of all the G7, G20 countries. So we have to make sure that from now on, for the other events that are going to follow this summit, that what we have decided today actually takes concrete shape. Because the programs, the projects that are in place currently are not in step with reality. We need more, and we know that despite the COVAX initiative, which is an excellent and highly commendable initiative, because without COVAX, a lot of countries wouldn't even have a single vaccine. We know that they have done excellent work, but it is insufficient, and therefore countries need to move to the other mechanisms that have been addressed this afternoon. We also said that a vaccine should be produced in Africa for Africa. And I have noticed that for several months now, I have attended meetings in Brussels. We have met with all sorts of representatives of different banks. We have even worked with the French Development Agency, the AFD, with DFC. Everyone is mobilized so that Africa can produce these vaccines. So we have to remove the constraints to the manufacturing of vaccines in Africa. And as we saw, South Africa and Rwanda are also engaged in this process, and we need to go beyond. SDRs, special drawing rights, have occupied a large part of our discussion. 33 billion for 55 countries, 1.2 billion inhabitants. It's just a drop in the ocean. This is our share via the mechanism that has been in place for a long, long time. And this is precisely why we are trying to change this and move to 100 billion, which would be more equitable. And as President Macron said, some of this has to be earmarked for vaccines, because that is a health emergency that cannot wait. But the rest also has to go to economic recovery, because if there is no economic recovery, the problems will be exacerbated and destruction will be inevitable. And I'm not even talking about terrorism here, which is restructuring the whole continent. But what about the youth? What about jobs for them? What about the whole economy, all the different sectors of the economy that need financing as well? So this needs to change. As far as SDRs are concerned, we need to put in place transparent mechanisms, transparent modalities, hand in hand with all the multilateral institutions and the African Development Bank. We must make sure that we're able to boost the African economy. There is also our debt, the commercial debt, and we need to find mechanisms, and just like China and the US and all the large countries have done. Africa should also benefit from its own mechanism, its African mechanism, which we will build with our partners in the European Union, with the G20 members, in order to achieve economic recovery on the African continent. Right, there's so much I would like to say. There are so many highly commendable actions. The engagement, the commitment of 40% of Africans being vaccinated thanks to COVAX, and the fact that those who don't need vaccines can release those vaccines and send them to Africa as quickly as possible. I think this is really a new departure. It's a new deal, indeed. This is a sort of a treaty for African growth and for peace on the African continent, because peace and growth go hand in hand. So once again, thank you very much, Emmanuel, for your contribution. Thank you. Thank you, dear Maki. I'd like to give the floor now to the Director General of the IMF, Kristalina Georgieva. Thank you so much for all the work that you've done yourself and your team at the IMF, because this initiative has been built for several months now, and thanks to your work, we are here where we stand today. Thank you, Mr. President. Congratulations for this summit. It was very important indeed for Africa, but it was also very important for everyone else.
I would like to sum up the message I got from the African leaders. The aspirations of Africa are for a fair shot. A shot in the arm, vaccinate everybody, everywhere, and a shot at a better future. Revitalizing the economy and bringing jobs, good jobs for the young people of Africa. An aspiration for a future in which Africa does not miss on the major transformation that the world is undertaking towards digital, low-carbon, climate-resilient growth. On the first issue of vaccines, it is by now very clear that there is no durable exit from the economic crisis unless we exit the health crisis. Not doing so has significant macroeconomic and financial stability implications, and this is why it is a very important topic for us at the IMF. We have worked on the pathway to accelerate the exit from the health crisis, and to sum it up, it would require setting our eyes on 40% vaccinations of everyone, everywhere, by the end of 21. That is very important for Africa. 60% vaccinations by the middle of 22. And then we have a hope of turning this page. We are convinced that this is the best, highest return public investment in history. It would generate $9 trillion additional output by 2025. 60% of this benefit goes to developing countries, 40% goes to advanced economies. And I look at Minister Le Maire. In advanced economies, we expect this to generate $1 trillion in additional public revenues. So it is paramount to mobilize, to make sure that we fund COVAX and the ENACT accelerator, that we act fast to reallocate early this year the excess doses, which we assess to be about 500 million, to countries that need it, and to aim for free movement of vaccines, increasing production. Obviously, the African leaders spoke about it, and President Macron, and overshoot production at least by 1 billion doses in 22 to make sure we move fast. A preview on Friday, we are going to publish our paper. It has all the details why we are convinced that this is viable and why I was so thrilled to hear in the room universally very strong demand from Africa. Not surprisingly, vaccinations in Africa stand at 2.9%. If we take out Morocco, which is the country that has advanced the most, it is 2% or a little less. Secondly, on the issue of a shot at a better future. Africa is very constrained in terms of fiscal space. African leaders are in a very tight spot. Revenues are down, expenditures are up, and debt is high. Therefore, if we want to prevent a lost decade in Africa, we all need to mobilize to support Africa, and Africa needs to mobilize itself to support its people. We have three big buckets that we have gotten work to do at the IMF, and I'm delighted to have this duty to serve. One, the special drawing rights. You heard the African leaders. We got today close to, I counted, 60% of the quota holding of the IMF speaking, and the message was do it fast and look at ways in which special drawing rights from countries that don't need it can be on lent to countries that desperately need it. I pledge by the end of August to present to our board the proposal for the new allocation. I hope that the presidents here would take this to be fast enough. I built a reputation in 2020 for speed when the fund was the first to deliver support, financial support in Africa, so I have to guard this reputation. We would then work to present by the annual meetings of the IMF a proposal for how much and for what purpose we can deploy SDRs that are on-lended to countries. The second big topic is debt. We very much thank the G20 and the Paris Club for the debt service suspension initiative. It helped, provided last year 5.7 billion of breathing space. And we are particularly grateful for the common framework that brings all creditors, including non-Paris Club members and the private sector. We have 3 cases: Chad, Ethiopia, Zambia. The creditor committee on Chad is meeting tomorrow. It is paramount for us to succeed, because if we succeed, more countries would be willing to step forward if they need that restructuring. The third and very important bucket is about what countries themselves ought to do. And you heard the presidents. It is so important that we use this crisis as an opportunity to raise more revenues, improve the quality of expenditures, come up with financial innovations that help stretch budgets further. I want to finish with a very simple observation, a lesson we learned from this crisis. Our economies are not very different from us. People with weak immune systems were devastated by COVID. Economies with weak fundamentals are devastated by the economic crisis. So we have to build strong fundamentals, because we live in a more shock-prone world, and we have to be able to have the resilience to these shocks. Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Merci beaucoup, Madame la Directrice Générale. Merci à vous. Nous allons maintenant répondre à quelques questions.
We will now answer a few questions.
Le son, s'il vous plaît. Merci. Une première question.
First question from Oumar Nigue from Senegalese press.
Bonsoir et bonjour,
Evening. Mr. President, I have 2 questions. A question for President Macky Sall, another for President Macron. Mr. President Macky Sall, since the outset of the pandemic, you've heightened your advocacy on the reform of economic and financial global governance. As co-chair of this summit, what are the priority reforms to sustain the emergence efforts of the African continent? President Macron, the initiative we we've seen was hailed unanimously. So what will be the monitoring or follow-up mechanism for the promotion and implementation of the conclusions from this summit? Thank you. Thank you for that question. On advocacy, you're right. What I call by priority reform on global governments, we have a macroeconomic framework, which is one agreed, even if it's rather forced agreement, because countries, in actual fact, don't have much of the choice. Those were the rules set sometimes with a great deal of conservatism. What were the rules? Well, you needed to have a deficit framework of 3%. And as soon as you were at 3, 5, 4%, well, it was a big fight with the IMF because disagreement on the multilateral aspects and also the solidity of their currency. We had that straitjacket. The other aspect is not only the deficit had to be at 3%, but we couldn't have a debt level higher than 70% of our GDP. And if you can't get into debt for public investment when our states are developing, everything is to be created, and the state is just about the only economic agent that must build schools, roads, water, provide grants to students, must do everything. We've noted that Basel IV, Basel III and IV strengthen the contingent debt when even our national companies that provide services or acquire assets, all that's placed on the country's debt. So reaching 70% becomes very easy, and even if we were to if we don't change with the SDRs, if we don't change, we wouldn't be able to consume it, even to buy vaccines. So it's vital that that framework be changed. Of course, we must commit as Africans on mobilizing our internal revenues, on fiscal transparency, and efforts that we are compelled to make in order to diverse the trust that we seek from our partners. But it cuts both ways. And then there are the procedures. Procedures were built in the name of transparency. I'd like to say that speed doesn't run counter to transparency, so we can't apply the rules with all the administrative and bureaucratic procedures. It's not transparent. There are internal efforts underway, digitizing our government departments. That's become key. But on the side of the partners, they must accept that we build together joint agreed procedures so that the resources mobilized are genuinely consumed. Because in most portfolios with our partners, rarely do we exceed 10% disbursement. There are huge sums that are flagged that we can't commit. There are non-objections that take time, procedures that are impossible to overcome. And every donor has his own procedures. We have to harmonize. That's why this framework is important, so that all those who accept this new deal with Africa can at least agree on procedures. That's, in summary, what I call inter alia, the reform of global governance on major fiscal issues. To answer your point, as I said, the next months will be marked by milestones that will allow us to follow up today's conclusions. G7, 20 in the restructuring meetings, debt rescheduling in the second half, the launch of the alliance that we'll be doing in the second half of 21 through the French presidency of the EU. For that, the working group that was put in place to prepare this summit will be maintained through the French presidency of the EU. I'd like to salute, as I did at the outset, the quality of the work done, because with the health constraints, the preparation of this summit was a real challenge without in-person meetings between Sherpas. We're going to continue this coordination with African states, with the AU, with, of course, the international organizations, the banks, development banks, with, of course, the EU. Second question from Giscard Coussema from Congo TV. Thanks very much. I have a joint question to President Macron and Félix Tshisekedi. You presented this summit as being an emergency meeting or one of ambition, but in Africa we have the impression that the economic crisis is far more important than the health crisis linked to COVID, and Africans would like to have a boost for their economies rather than tons of vaccines. Excellency President Macron, what's your view? And to President Félix Tshisekedi earlier, he gave part of the explanation. Vaccination coverage is low, it's true, there are no vaccines, but also there's a significant joint opposition. I'm thinking the acting chair of the AU. I mean, how will you, as acting chair, can you convince the population to accept this vaccine that will be rolled out in the coming months?
Okay. Bien, merci.
Well, thank you, Giscard, for that question. Indeed, mobilization is very low. We've seen 1,600,000 doses, and we've only managed to vaccinate 10,000 people, no more. And for the most part, these were expatriates. So it's just to tell you that there's no mobilization on the side of Congolese, because next to that there was a lot of work in social networks that, as it were, vilified vaccination, presenting it as an international conspiracy aimed at exterminating Africans. There were opinion leaders who, of course, took a stand in the media, across media, to really slam the vaccine, to present it, to vilify it, and to present it as a criminal act. And in fact, on each and every occasion that we had, to highlight the benefits, well, the unfortunate impacts of the vaccine on certain people who were vaccinated here in the West. Well, these opinion leaders rode that wave in order to continue to hammer this initiative. So I think that the first thing to be done is, of course, to have a counter awareness program, as it were, to explain to our people that long-term, by not being vaccinated, we can indeed fall prey to a new variant that could come along far more virulently and may well develop resistance, such that the vaccines that will come or that already exist at this point in time will no longer be efficacious. And I think, and as I said earlier, maybe one should move very swiftly in producing vaccines in Africa. I believe that Africans are quite sensitive to that type of thing. If the product is homegrown, comes from Africa, they see it and they know it, well, then I think that it will really have a positive impact. That's what I can give you by way of an answer on that. On the question that was directed to me, if I may, I think we have collectively acquired expertise on the vaccination campaigns. I mean, nothing's inevitable, and we're used with UNICEF and with international structures to roll out major vaccination campaigns. We've done it for years, and so I think we can restore trust that there's no inevitability here. Of course, a lot of use of social media, as the President said, of stigmatizing certain vaccines that were shipped earlier. I think all that's being remedied, and I don't think that is inevitable. And there's no priority given to health over economy at this summit. Quite the contrary. contrary, it's meeting this dual urgency, and it's true we want to go further on COVAX by strengthening, vaccinating more. Everything that's done on the SDR debt, restructuring, private entrepreneurship is an economic response. But I'd like you to realize that there will not be a maximum economic recovery if there is not a genuine, fully fledged, coherent health strategy that goes via vaccination. Why? Because all African countries, for their growth, depend on their regional integration in the African continent to non-African economies, the free movement, the free flow of people and goods. If one country doesn't roll out the vaccine and has the vaccine or the variants, other countries will shut down their borders sooner or later, including the African continent, if there's too divergence on vaccination policies. It will create edge effects that will be very damaging for the economy. I believe the vaccine is the paradox of the situation in which we find us. The vaccine is the only right solution for AFD. The major injustice of this epidemic from the outset, the richest countries were able to have a very expensive response, shutting down their economies and societies. Poor countries with intermediate income didn't have the means for that strategy. They had to remain open with very tough situation outside the African continent, in fact, as we saw with India and Brazil. The vaccine allows you not to have to choose between the two, but to protect everyone. If I may add, Mr. President, to our friends from the DRC, that we had the same problem at the outset, at the beginning, with the social networks. Today, as of yesterday, we were at 420,000 injections out of a population of 16 million. That's around 3.7 to 4%. So there's still way of understanding for all Africans that salvation lies in the vaccine. There's no alternative. There can't be a recovery if people are sick or if COVID's still there. It's difficult, but we have to plow on. We have to continue. And there are countries, Africans, who want to be vaccinated. They don't have the vaccine. Those who have it, at least that we should try and understand. We're looking for the vaccines. So our friends from the Congo really must take that, and the President must continue to plead for that, of course. But yes, I have to say that we, of course, have the AstraZeneca vaccine. We benefited from the AstraZeneca doses. As we were getting ready in March to launch the vaccination campaign, well, there was that blip, as it were, in Europe. There were 11 countries who suspended the administration of those doses. So you'll understand, you'll appreciate, of course, that there was considerable impact on the back of that. There was the damage was huge, and we had to start over again. And our doses expire in June, so the time it took to kickstart all that, it wasn't possible, and so we were under the obligation of returning those vaccines to the African countries who'd asked for them. So obviously there's a mobilization effort required, but I'm convinced that production on African soil will boost this mobilization campaign that we must roll out. One for Jeune Afrique.
Good evening. My first question goes to President Macron. President Tshisekedi, you talked about an issuance of $33 billion of special drawing rights for Africa that could, with no guarantee to the reallocation, be hiked up to $100 billion. Now, aren't these amounts still insufficient for a continent of 54 countries? By way of comparison, the recovery plan for France is $100 million for 2 years.
Tshisekedi.
Then I have two sub-questions, one for President Macron.
Est-ce que vous
Mr.
confirmez
President,
votre voyage annoncé à la fin du mois au Rwanda?
That you will go to Rwanda as you announced at the end of the month. And do you want to, can you confirm your trip, and are you going to present official excuses to Rwanda for the genocide? And to President Tshisekedi now,
est-ce que la transition militaire en place actuellement au Tchad
is the military transition now in place in Chad in line with the democratic principles of the African Union?
Est-ce que nous n'avons pas assisté de fait à un coup d'État qui n'est pas sans nom à N'Djamena
assisted now to a coup, a de facto coup in N'Djamena?
Selon vous, est-ce que
according to you, is Mahamat Idriss Déby and the other military men of the Transitional Council will be able to be candidates for the next presidential election?
Première question pour être très clair.
Now, to answer the first question, to be very
Nous allons
clear,
émettre 650 milliards
we are
de
going to
DTS.
issue 650 billion of special
C'est
drawing rights.
votre quote-part qui vous donne des
Mechanically,
DTS.
it's
Et donc, en
your
effet,
share of participation that
parce que ce sont
entitles
les
you
actionnaires
to
autour de
these
la table,
special
si je puis
drawing
dire,
rights. I mean,
qui l'ont en
it's only
fonction
normal
de cette
because the
quote-part.
shareholders
Ce
around
sont
the
les pays
table
les plus
have
riches
these
qui ont
rights
ces
according
DTS
to
lorsqu'on va faire cette
their
émission.
contributions.
Donc,
So
il est
the wealthier
assez
countries have
mécanique
these
que
rights
l'Afrique
according to
est
their
justement une partie
contributions. So
faible,
it's only
ce que nous avons
mechanical,
nous-mêmes dit tout à l'heure.
naturally mechanical,
C'est
that
33 milliards.
Africa only has
C'est la
a
part,
small share of
je veux
this
dire, mécanique
33 billion.
de la
That's the
conséquence de ces
mechanical
650 milliards.
share that is the result of this
Derrière
issue
cela,
of
il
special
est
drawing rights.
d'ores et déjà acquis.
But it is already sure that the 33 billion is not going to be the ceiling, because several countries have already committed to reallocate their special drawing rights to Africa. France is going to has initiated a policy of reallocation of these special drawing rights, and others are going to follow suit. What I'm saying is that if other countries are following what we are willing to do, then we will reach 100 billion in special drawing rights. So if every single country, in due proportion of what it is entitled to, if it does the same effort as France is willing to do, we can even reach 100 billion. If you want to go further, we could. But it seems to us that this is what is, one, feasible, two, reasonable. It all depends, of course, on the assent of the larger donors. Of course, if the US decide to follow suit, of course they'll have a great share in the success, and this is a decision that is in the hands of the American Congress, and so we need to convince them. So very clearly, the 33 billion are not seen as sufficient in our eyes, and that is why we're fighting, and we are taking our own responsibilities on, and we reallocate them. We choose as shareholders to dilute our part within the IMF by reallocating part of our SDRs. But to go further, I mean, we're closer to 300 billion, I mean 290 billion that are needed by Africa. So our will is to carry out an expertise and sell part of the gold reserves, which would give the capacity to reinvest and to go even further, because when we draw up a recovery plan, this means getting money from the markets, and this means using the SDRs to the African Development Bank or regional banks to give greater leverage and then to have more in real time. Sorry for being a bit financially technical, but anyway, all this to say that if you want to compare this with the 100 billion, you mustn't compare the 33 billion, but the final sum that we will have with the reallocation of special drawing rights and possibly the sale of gold reserves that we can compare with the 100 billion in France. So if we can cooperate with the African development, we can do even more. To answer your second question, I can confirm that I will be traveling at the end of May to Rwanda, which will be a trip meant to discuss political matters, memorial matters, but also economic, sanitary, and future issues. So what we want to do with President Kagame is to open up a new page and open up a new page of our common history and talk about structuring projects and future projects. And what I'll have to say, I'll say it then.
President Macron, can I just say one word? On the 100 billion, is it enough? let's be very clear. No, it is not enough. We have a financial gap just to catch up with the impact of COVID for the continent of Africa of $285 billion. For Africa to catch up with the pre-COVID strong growth, we would need probably about as much as this. It is genuinely all hands on deck situation. We see 50% of developing countries that used to catch up with the better-offs falling further behind. That cannot be left to fester. And in that sense, I would highly recommend that you, the media, raise your voice. It is not enough, but we also shouldn't think of only the SDRs as being the silver bullet. We have to bring financing from development organizations. Either is going to replenish by the end of this year. We have to make the private sector attracted to go into a risky environment by de-risking investments. And if we are genuine here, we would say this summit was so timely because we must act.
Merci beaucoup, Christina. Monsieur le Président, sur la situation au Tchad.
Now, Mr. President, will you answer the question on the situation in Chad? Yes. I would say that what happened in Chad was not a coup. It was an assassination, the assassination of a head of state with his own personality and who held his country. How could I put it? He was holding it strongly. He was, holding it tight. And on his brutal demise, this, of course, can only give way to some disappointments. And I would tend to say that it's lucky that the situation was turned around very rapidly, because in a situation like the one that ensued with chaos, it's better to have something very strong that happens to take hold of the situation. That doesn't mean that the CMT has the right to do anything they wish. Supported by the African Union and the international community. No, we understood the situation. The situation was very fragile. We must remember that Chad is threatened by hordes of rebels and also is submitted to terrorist threats. So the brutal demise of the marshal in Chad could have given an opportunity to those individuals to destabilize the country by trying to take advantage of it and taking over. So there needs to be a military response to the situation. It was given. That does not mean that rights and liberties can be done away with. No. The power in place today and the Transitional Council needs to ensure law and order, but at the same time ensure the respect for rights and liberties. And what is most important is that they respect this period of transition, the 18 months during which we want to have inclusiveness implemented, i.e. all political colorations, all political parties and all those who wish to be represented can be within the government. It's very important. Because if there is inclusiveness, there is national unity. There's an agreement to go towards the elections together. And after 18 months, when the elections will have taken place, then and only then I think the country will be able to pave the way towards long-term stability. That is what I think for the situation in Chad. I don't know. Was there a sub-question on Chad? I can't remember. Did I answer your question? Yeah?
Can they stand for elections? That was the question. Well, as far as my understanding goes,
Je parle ici de ce que je me suis dit, nous sommes dit avec le président Mahamat.
Talking about what we talked about with President Mohamed Déby, I think no member of the Transitional Military Council should stand for elections because they acceded to power in the way that we all know, and I think it would not be advisable to reposition themselves in this manner. It would not be in step with the right way of proceeding. Well, first of all, they are military forces. Power cannot go to the army, and furthermore, they took over power in exceptional circumstances. So I believe that I think that maybe they should go back to the army and focus on maintaining the stability of the country. And I think that's possibly what's going to happen because that is our position within the African Union. Thank you very much. The press conference is over. Thank you very much for joining us.